Hey, it's Alabama Annie here on the front porch of the old home place today before it gets too hot again. We are in the middle of a big old heat spell. I'm talking hot. At any rate, we're going to talk a little bit about a subject today that is not humorous or scary. Well, it should be scary because it could happen again. It is about the Indian removal, the infamous Trail of Tears, where Andrew Jackson and the government denied and refuted every treaty they had signed with most of the five civilized tribes that they called them that, and removed them from their land, forced them to walk away with just basically the belongings on their back all the way to what is now Oklahoma and further, where they were placed on lands that were established for each tribe. And this is about the schools that were established by first missionaries and then later the government to house and educate their children. It's called the Indian School. Not too far from the state line along I-40 between Arkansas and Oklahoma sits a large old building that used to be a school. It was constructed in or around 1834 during the forced migration of Native American tribes at the time of the Trail of Tears. It was founded by a Protestant minister and his wife for the Choctaw Indians. The minister and his wife had accompanied the Choctaws during the removal from their lands, enduring all the same hardships and telling them to trust in God for all their needs. Upon their arrival in Oklahoma, after many months walking, the minister and Choctaw men began construction of the first building on the site. It was a log structure that would serve as a classroom for the children and a meeting house for Sunday services. But as time passed, the long distances the children had to travel in winter from their families to attend the school, most times in inclement weather along dangerous trails, played a part in the expansion of the school to then include sleeping quarters for the students, and the first boarding school was established. Soon, a school for girls was built as well, where English trades and the Bible were taught. The schools were run under very strict guidelines, but the children who attended the schools were well cared for in the matters of their personal hygiene and health. They had a good diet and they had clean places to sleep. The boys and girls, though, were kept separate in class. The speaking of their Native American languages was forbidden. It was preferred by the whites that the Choctaw students set aside their own language and their native dress and their religious practices for traditional English and Christianity. After all, the school had been funded by the American Mission Board, as were many of the Indian schools prior to, during, and after the Indian removal. But a few years later, the minister and his wife were replaced by some government agents who were not as benevolent to the children. They used them in cruel ways, slave labor, and even worse. Rules were made to be followed to the letter under their watchful eye. The girls and boys were housed in dormitories with 20 to 30 beds per room. Meals were served in the dining hall, where the children were made to enter single file and no talking was allowed. Their food consisted mainly of a thin gruel, bread, and occasionally milk. There was no bending of the rules. Anyone caught cheating on classwork or stealing another's belongings or hiding food were severely punished. The amount of food given to them was reduced by the new overseers, and in winter they were no longer provided adequate clothing or enough wood to keep fires for heat in the dormitories. There are stories that some of the children did not survive these cruelties and were secretly buried on the school grounds after severe beatings turned deadly. When the schools closed during Reconstruction after the Civil War, the outbuildings were slowly destroyed by time and weather, or burned mysteriously, but the main building still stood, surviving on into the days of World War I and World War II, when it was begun to be used as a storage facility for surplus Army supplies, county records, and such. One portion of the building was used as a records department until the women who worked in the building began to tell stories of hearing footsteps on the floor above them and finding locked doors opening on their own. Once the women had heard children singing. The voices were coming from what was the old kitchen. Another time, one of the women came out of the restroom into the hall to see an old woman standing in front of her. The woman was wrapped in a shawl and reached out her hand to the office worker. The office worker ran screaming back into the office. She demanded a transfer that very day. But the straw that broke the camel's back was the morning all three of the workers entered the building together and stepped into the long dark hallway to turn on the lights when suddenly they heard the voice of a small child. The voice was crying, "Help me! Help me!" The three women caught a glimpse of a fleeting little figure as it faded into the darkness. "It just about broke your hearts to hear," one of them said. "We just couldn't do it anymore, not another single day. With none of the office staff willing to work there any longer, the building was only used after that for storage." Still, occasionally, necessity dictated that one or more of the office workers would have to go to the old school to retrieve records or files, and always argued the point. "I'd just as soon have shot myself in the foot than to go back there to that place. I always take someone with me when I go, and I wouldn't rather go at all," they said. "Why, just driving up to the place gives you the creeps with all those empty windows staring down at you like eyes." There was a deputy I'd take with me on occasion, a big fella, over 6 foot tall, and he said the place even gave him the creeps. It got to where he and the other officers would even flip a coin to see who had to go when we had to go to the building. When you'd be upstairs in those rooms where all the files were kept, you'd hear footsteps all around and sometimes even laughter, as if children were playing a game of hide and seek with you among the shelves, and you'd smell smells like the kitchen was still running and food was being prepared. One time, when we were looking through some old plat books for a particular survey, we both heard a woman's voice say, "Get out." And we did, by golly. We grabbed up those plat books and took off. There was also an underground passage between the main building and another that was blocked off after some kids got down in there and found the skeleton of what was believed to be one of the students from the Indian school. The children left terrified, and the children also claimed they had been chased by an old man in coveralls who was carrying a shovel. And one of the boys had an attack of some kind and never uttered another single word after that the rest of his life. And there had been ghostly sightings of girls dancing on the grounds of the school, of fleeting lights and mystery figures. They have been witnessed darting across the open fields and nearby fields at the old school, and it still sits abandoned, falling into ruin along the Trail of Tears. Now I'm going to play you a song, or a verse from a song that I wrote about the Trail of Tears. Here we go. Our lands have been taken from our hands like 1,000 grains of sand. They come, move along past muddy fields where we have spilled our blood. Move along, we're burying our dead along the way. How long must we walk this trail of tears? Must we walk this trail of tears? Trail of Tears. The story of the old Indian school. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back with another episode any day now.